A wealthy rancher saw Apache widow beaten each day by the town until he took her as his bride. The sun was just rising over the wide open plains when the rancher mounted his horse, feeling the crisp morning air brush against his face. He was a man of wealth and influence, known throughout the county for his success and fairness. His ranch was vast, stretching as far as the eye could see, with cattle grazing peacefully under the warm light of dawn. But despite all he had learned long ago that wealth and comfort could not shield a person from the suffering of others. As he rode along the dusty trail that led toward the town, he could hear the faint sounds of the village waking up. The clatter of pans, the creak of doors, the low murmur of early conversations. It was a small town, one that had grown slowly over the years, where everyone knew everyone else, and rumors traveled faster than the wind. The rancher had spent many years here, observing life at a distance, rarely stepping into the town unless it was necessary. But that morning, something unusual caught his eye. A woman was standing near the edge of the market square. She was slight in build, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. Her hands were calloused from work, and her clothes, though worn, were neat and clean. But what drew the rancher's attention was the way the townspeople treated her. A group of men and women stood nearby, their faces twisted with scorn, whispering cruelly to one another. One man, taller and heavier than the rest, leaned toward her, shaking his finger and speaking in a sharp tone. The woman did not respond with anger, nor did she cry. Despair. She simply bowed her head slightly and continued her task, trying to ignore them. The rancher's heart tightened at the sight. He had seen cruelty before, the subtle kind that made life unbearable for those who could not defend themselves. But there was something about this woman, perhaps her calm dignity, perhaps her courage to continue despite the humiliation, that stirred a protective feeling in him. He reined in his horse, watching from a distance. Every day, as he later came to learn, the woman faced similar treatment. The town had no patience for her being different, for being alone, or for the shadow of her past that clung to her. She was a widow from the Apache community, and her husband had died tragically a few years before. In a town where people prized conformity and gossip, her loss had made her a target. Each day someone found a reason to mock her, to make her feel small and unwelcome. The rancher could see that her spirit had not broken, even if the world around her tried to crush it. That morning, she had been carrying a bundle of firewood from her small home to the market. One of the villagers, seeing her struggle with a particularly heavy log, snickered and made a remark about her being weak, useless, and incapable. Others laughed, adding their voices to the cruel chorus. She stumbled slightly, but did not fall. Inspiration. She did not even glance at them. She simply set the wood down, wiped the sweat from her brow, and continued as though her strength alone could shield her from their words. The rancher felt a pang of anger mixed with admiration. He could not understand how a community could be so blind to decency, so willing to torment someone who had already suffered so much. But he also recognized the delicate balance he needed to maintain. He was wealthy, respected, and powerful, but openly challenging the town's behavior could bring trouble, both to him and to the woman he was beginning to care about from afar. He resolved to find a way to help, quietly, without drawing unwanted attention. In the days that followed, he began small. He would leave a basket of fresh vegetables or bread at the edge of her property, knowing she would find it. Sometimes he would discreetly pay for supplies she could not afford, or mend a broken fence on her land when he passed by. Each act was simple, almost invisible, but it allowed him to feel that he was making a difference. The woman, initially wary, noticed the gestures. She did not know who was helping her at first, and suspicion ran through her mind. People had helped her before, only to ask for favors, or to mock her later. But over time, she began to sense that the kindness came from someone sincere. A note left with a loaf of bread or a quietly fixed gate began to feel like a lifeline in a town that had given her little comfort. One afternoon, as the rancher rode past the market square once again, he saw her in trouble. A man had become aggressive, pushing and yelling at her over a trivial matter, a misunderstanding about a payment or a misplaced item. The widow, though strong and brave, was visibly shaken. Her hands trembled slightly, and for the first time she looked around as if searching for help. Without thinking twice, the rancher dismounted. His boots kicked up dust as he approached the scene. The townspeople froze, surprised by his sudden appearance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his presence alone carried authority. The man who had been harassing her paused, suddenly aware that he was facing someone who would not tolerate injustice. "Leave her be," the rancher said calmly, but with a voice that brooked no argument. The man stepped back, muttering under his breath, while others looked on in stunned silence. The widow's eyes widened slightly, a mix of relief and disbelief crossing her face. She did not speak, unsure if it was real or just another trick of fate. After the man slunk away, the rancher turned to her. "Are you all right?"
he asked gently.
There was no condescension in his voice, only concern. She nodded, still holding onto the bundle of wood she had been carrying.
Breaths.
"Yes, thank you," she murmured, her voice soft but steady.
From that moment, something shifted between them. She began to look for him from time to time, though always cautiously.
He respected her space, never forcing conversation, never showing impatience. And gradually their connection grew, not through words alone, but through shared glances, small gestures, and an unspoken understanding. Brash. The rancher also began to notice more about her life. Her days were long and filled with labor, from tending to a small garden to caring for the few animals she could keep. Her home was modest, neat, and full of signs of self-reliance. He admired the way she managed her responsibilities without complaint, even under the weight of constant judgment. He saw strength where others saw weakness, and his admiration deepened into something more profound.
Yet even as he felt drawn to her, he knew he had to proceed carefully.
The town's cruelty was not easily dismissed. A single wrong word or action could worsen her situation. He had to find the balance between offering protection and allowing her independence. In his mind, he plotted small, careful interventions, helping where he could, stepping in only when necessary, and always ensuring that her dignity remained intact. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the rancher stopped by her home again. This time he brought supplies, firewood for the winter, fresh vegetables, and a small basket of fruit. He placed them near her door quietly, hoping she would not see him, though secretly hoping she would. She did see him. From the porch of her small house, she watched him mount his horse and ride away. Her heart caught between suspicion and gratitude. Slowly, she began to realize that there was someone in this world who saw her, not as a target for ridicule, not as a lonely widow, but as a person of value and worth. That realization brought with it a flicker of hope she had not felt in years. As the days passed, the rancher continued his quiet vigilance. He noticed the way the townspeople whispered about him when he interacted with her, their disapproval clear but powerless to stop him. And he noticed the subtle ways she responded, how she straightened her back a little more proudly, how she allowed herself brief smiles, how her eyes occasionally searched for him among the crowd. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The town's cruelty had deep roots, and change would not come quickly. But he also knew that even the smallest acts of kindness could plant the seeds of courage, breath, and in his heart he felt a growing determination to protect her, to give her the respect and dignity she deserved, and perhaps to offer her a life free from fear for the first time in years. The morning light broke over the plains once again, and the rancher rode out toward the town, his mind fixed on one thought. He would not allow her to face the world alone. And somewhere, in her small home on the edge of the square, the widow felt a quiet stirring of hope, as though the long shadows of the past might finally give way to the promise of a safer, kinder future. The days after the rancher first intervened were filled with small, quiet changes. The widow noticed them first. She found that the supplies left near her home were consistent, sometimes fresh bread, sometimes vegetables, and occasionally a bundle of firewood for the coming cold nights. At first she had been suspicious, unsure who might be behind such gestures. The town had not been kind to her in the past. Unexpected kindness often came with strings attached. Yet there was something different about these gifts. They felt sincere, thoughtful, and without expectation. Her curiosity grew, though she refused to ask anyone in town. Gossip traveled fast, and she did not want to reveal her vulnerability. But she could not deny that a quiet warmth had started to creep into her days, a small feeling that perhaps someone noticed her, not as a widow or an outsider, but as a person worthy of care. Breaths. The rancher, meanwhile, observed her from a distance. He could see how the town continued to humiliate her in subtle ways, a whispered remark here, a mocking glance there, people deliberately ignoring her or treating her as if she were invisible. It angered him, and yet he remained cautious. He did not want to draw unnecessary attention to her or himself, knowing that the more the town gossiped, the more danger she might face. But instead he chose small interventions. He repaired a fence near her home one evening, leaving it stronger than before, and even helped her gather firewood when the supply from the forest was scarce. At first, she did not acknowledge him, but over time their interactions became natural. He would speak softly, asking about her well-being, offering advice, or simply sharing a quiet moment in the early morning. She found herself listening, slowly trusting him. The walls she had built around her heart, built over years of hardship and cruelty, began to soften just a little. Despite the growing trust between them, the town's hostility only increased. People began to notice the rancher's attention toward her and whispered with disapproval. Some were openly critical, saying he had no right to interfere with how the widow lived or who she was. A few even went so far as to make threats, subtle but sharp, hoping to scare both of them into silence. The widow could feel their eyes on her, their judgment heavy and unrelenting. Brits. Each day brought new tension, and she felt the weight of the town pressing down on her shoulders. Yet, she was not alone anymore. The rancher's presence, though sometimes invisible, was always there. When a group of children tried to mimic the cruel behavior of adults, she no longer had to endure it silently. He appeared at the right moments, not to humiliate those children but to protect her dignity, showing the town that her life was no longer theirs to mock. Slowly a pattern emerged. Cruelty met kindness, cruelty met courage, and cruelty began to lose its power over her. One day, a particularly dangerous incident occurred that tested both of them. A man, known in the town for his short temper and influence, confronted the widow directly. He accused her of taking something that did not belong to her, something minor and trivial, yet he shouted in a way meant to humiliate her. The widow, though small in stature, stood her ground. She refused to let him intimidate her with false claims. But as his anger rose, so did the fear around her. The rancher, who had been nearby tending to his cattle, noticed the commotion immediately. He rode swiftly to the scene, dismounting in a controlled, commanding manner. His eyes locked on the man, steady and unwavering. "Step back," he said calmly but firmly. The man hesitated, unsure how to respond to such authority. The townspeople watched in silence, some shocked by the rancher's interference, others impressed by the courage it took to stand against wrongdoing. The widow felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a quiet embarrassment. She had grown used to facing insults and accusations alone, never imagining someone would come to her aid without expecting anything in return. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but no words came immediately. The rancher, sensing her discomfort, simply nodded toward her and guided her gently away from the crowd, ensuring she reached safety before addressing the man again. That evening, the widow reflected on the events of the day. She had seen cruelty all her life, had felt the sting of isolation and judgment, and had learned to rely only on herself. Yet the rancher's actions showed her a different kind of strength, one that did not come from wealth or power alone, but from integrity, courage, and respect. She began to realize that the world might still hold kindness, even when surrounded by unkindness. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the rancher and the widow grew stronger. Though still unspoken in many ways, he respected her need for independence, never pressuring her for friendship or conversation. She, in turn, started looking for him quietly, noticing his presence near her property, appreciating the small acts that showed he cared. A repaired fence, a basket of fresh bread, a quiet word of encouragement. All of these gestures began to weave a fragile thread of trust between them. The town's hostility did not disappear, however. Some townspeople saw their growing connection and began to speak more openly, mocking her for leaning on a man's help, criticizing him for his attention, and spreading rumors to shame both of them. The widow, though unsettled, found that she no longer felt entirely alone. She had someone who would defend her, someone who saw her worth even when the town did not. One afternoon, the widow was working in her small garden when a group of children, influenced by their parents' cruelty, began teasing her. They mimicked adults she had seen torment her before, calling her names and laughing cruelly. Normally, she would have endured it silently, but this time, the rancher appeared just in time. He spoke gently to the children, teaching them about respect and kindness, showing them that her life and dignity were not theirs to mock. The children were taken aback, and though some left with reluctance, others seemed to absorb the lesson. It was in these small moments that the widow began to understand the depth of his support. She could see that he was not simply protecting her out of pity or obligation. He respected her strength, admired her courage, and treated her as an equal. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. Even as trust grew, she remained cautious. The wounds from her past were deep, and years of suffering had taught her to be wary. She measured every interaction, every word, and every gesture carefully. Yet the rancher's patience and consistency gradually eroded her walls, teaching her that vulnerability did not always lead to harm. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, casting golden light across the plains, the rancher rode past her property and stopped. This time, he did not leave supplies or gestures. He simply stayed for a moment, watching her work from a respectful distance. She noticed him, of course, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile formed on her lips. It was a smile that spoke of recognition, trust, and a hint of hope. From that day on, their interactions became more natural, though still quiet. They shared small conversations, exchanged nods and glances, and occasionally offered each other brief words of encouragement. Every interaction was simple yet meaningful, building a bond that neither could ignore. The rancher's presence became a source of strength for the widow, and she began to believe that life could hold safety, kindness, and perhaps even friendship. Despite the growing connection, challenges remained. The town continued to whisper, judge, and sometimes act with subtle hostility. But the widow faced these moments with renewed courage, knowing that she was not entirely alone. The rancher's quiet support became a shield, allowing her to confront cruelty with dignity and strength. One afternoon, a particularly harsh winter storm approached. The wind blew fiercely across the plains, rattling windows and shaking trees. The widow struggled to gather firewood and secure her home. Without hesitation, the rancher appeared, helping her stack wood, secure doors, and ensure her safety. Together they worked quietly through the storm, their movements synchronized, a silent partnership forming between them. By the time the storm passed, the widow felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. She understood that this was not just protection. It was a bond built on respect, care, and shared humanity. As winter gave way to early spring, the widow found herself looking forward to the rancher's presence each day. His visits, whether visible or behind the scenes, became a source of hope and comfort. Narration, she began to imagine a life that was not dominated by fear and cruelty. A life where she could be treated with dignity and kindness. The seeds of trust and courage planted in her heart were beginning to grow, slowly but unmistakably. And the rancher, observing from afar, knew that the connection between them was more than fleeting concern. He saw her strength, admired her resilience, and felt a growing responsibility to ensure that she could live without fear. The town might still judge, whisper, and attempt to control her life, but he was determined that she would no longer face it alone. For the widow, each day brought a mix of anxiety and hope. The cruelty of the town remained, but it was now tempered by the presence of someone who truly cared. But in the quiet moments when she could finally breathe without fear, she began to allow herself a fragile but powerful feeling that she might not only survive but begin to live fully again. The widow had begun to feel a sense of security she had not known for many years. The quiet support of the rancher had given her hope, but the world around her had not changed. The town still whispered cruelly, still judged harshly, and still sought opportunities to undermine her. But she knew that relying on the rancher offered protection, but it also drew attention. And some in the town were not pleased with it. One morning, as she worked in her garden, she noticed a group of men approaching. Their expressions were serious, and there was a tension in the air that immediately made her uneasy. These were not idle children, or casual gossipers. These were men of influence in the town, men who expected to be obeyed, and feared no one. They surrounded her cautiously but firmly.
"Ah! You don't belong here," one of them said, his voice loud and sharp.
The town has rules, and you break them by living as you do, alone, without respect for our ways. The widow held her ground, though her heart pounded. She had faced such accusations many times before, but today was different. This confrontation was calculated, deliberate, meant to intimidate and assert control. She glanced toward the horizon, silently wishing the rancher were nearby, as he often seemed to arrive at the perfect moment to intervene. As if on cue, the sound of a horse's hooves echoed across the plains. The rancher appeared, calm and steady, his figure cutting through the tension like a shield. He rode up and dismounted, walking directly between the widow and the men. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. The men paused, uncertain how to proceed.
"This woman has done nothing to harm you," the rancher said, his voice calm but firm.
Leave her be. The men hesitated, muttering among themselves. Some were surprised that someone of the rancher's standing would intervene on behalf of a widow. Breaths. Others were angered by what they perceived as interference. Still, no one dared to challenge him directly. The widow felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with embarrassment at needing help once again. She realized that while she had gained strength from the rancher's quiet support, she still faced danger in the world that judged her. Over the following days, the tension in the town increased. Whispers turned into rumors. People questioned why a man of wealth and influence would concern himself with a widow, suggesting scandal or impropriety. The widow felt the weight of their judgment, a heavy reminder that her life was still under scrutiny. The rancher, however, did not waver. He continued his quiet support, repairing fences, leaving supplies, and offering guidance when needed. Slowly, the widow began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone who truly cared for her well-being. She began to understand that he admired her strength, respected her dignity, and saw in her resilience that few others could comprehend. One afternoon, as the widow worked alone near her small home, she noticed signs of a trap being set. A few villagers had blocked her usual path to the market, and their expressions were menacing. Fear rose in her chest, but she knew that she could not retreat without risking humiliation, or worse. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, when the rancher appeared quietly from the edge of the field. "Follow me," he whispered. Without hesitation, she obeyed, trusting him completely. He led her along a different path, ensuring she could reach the safety of the ranch without confrontation. Along the way, she realized that her life had become intertwined with his in a way she had never expected. She trusted him, relied on him, and felt a growing sense of connection that went beyond gratitude. The days that followed were marked by a series of small victories and challenges. The town's hostility did not vanish, but the widow faced it with newfound courage. The rancher's support gave her the confidence to stand tall, speak calmly, and assert herself in situations that would once have terrified her. She began to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, the rancher invited the widow to sit with him on a hill overlooking her home. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried a quiet calm. For a long time they sat in silence, watching the world settle into evening. "You have faced so much," the rancher said softly, breaking the silence. "And yet, you remain strong. I admire that more than you know."
The widow felt her heart stir.
She had never received such a genuine compliment, never felt such recognition of her struggle and resilience. Words were not enough to express the mixture of gratitude, respect, and a small, unfamiliar warmth she felt toward him. I have had no choice but to be strong," she replied quietly. "There was no one to protect me before." He nodded, understanding without judgment. "You do not have to face the world alone anymore. You do not have to be afraid."
Those words lingered in her mind long after the sun disappeared behind the horizon. For the first time, she considered a life that was not defined by fear, judgment, or loneliness.
She imagined a future where she could live with safety, dignity, and even companionship. It was an idea that had once seemed impossible, but now felt within reach. The turning point came a few days later. A major confrontation with the town forced her to make a choice. A group of influential men arrived at her home, demanding she leave the area or face severe consequences. Their voices were harsh, their threats clear. The widow felt panic rise in her chest, but she also felt the calm assurance of the rancher by her side. "You do not have to go," he said firmly. "Brain. You belong here as much as anyone. I will not allow them to intimidate you." The widow realized that she had a choice: continue to live in fear, alone and vulnerable, or accept the rancher's protection and partnership. It was a difficult decision. Accepting his help would mean trusting someone completely, opening her life to new possibilities, and stepping into a future she had long believed was closed to her. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. I will trust you. I will not face this alone." The rancher nodded, a quiet pride in his expression. "Then we face it together." From that moment, their lives became deeply intertwined. The rancher ensured her safety, spoke to the town with calm authority, and gradually earned the respect of those who had once opposed her. The widow, in turn, began to embrace the new life offered to her. She learned to rely on another person without losing her independence, discovering a balance between self-reliance and trust. As the weeks passed, their bond strengthened. They shared small routines, worked together on repairs and chores, and slowly developed a deep understanding of one another. The rancher admired her ability to endure hardship with grace, and she admired his patience, fairness, and unwavering support. It was a partnership built not on convenience or obligation, but on mutual respect, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's strengths. Challenges remained. Some townspeople still whispered, some still judged. But the widow now faced them with a new courage. She no longer cowered under scrutiny, no longer accepted cruelty as a part of life. The rancher's presence gave her confidence, not by taking her power away, but by showing her that she could stand tall even in the face of adversity.
One memorable afternoon, a severe storm struck the area. The widow's small home and garden were threatened by strong winds and rain.
Without hesitation, the rancher arrived, helping her secure her home, gather supplies, and protect what she had built. They worked side by side, silently coordinating their efforts. By the time the storm passed, the widow felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude, realizing that her life had changed in ways she had once thought impossible. In the calm after the storm, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky clear and the sun break through the clouds. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that their bond had grown far beyond mere protection or friendship.
They were partners in the truest sense, facing the world together with courage and respect. The widow began to allow herself small moments of hope.
She imagined a life where fear no longer dominated her days, where she could live openly and with dignity. She envisioned a future where she was not just surviving but truly living, and where the rancher's presence was a source of strength and companionship, not obligation or pity. The rancher, too, felt a shift in his own life. Helping the widow had started as an act of kindness and responsibility, but it had grown into something deeper. He admired her resilience, respected her courage, and felt a quiet warmth in knowing that he could make a difference in someone's life. Their connection was no longer just about protection. It had become a partnership built on trust, understanding, and mutual care. And so, as spring approached and the plains came alive with new growth, the widow and the rancher faced the world together. The town's hostility had not disappeared entirely, but it had lessened, and the widow had gained a courage she had long thought impossible. She had chosen to trust, and in doing so, had discovered the strength to face adversity with dignity. The turning point had arrived, and with it came a new chapter in their lives. One defined not by fear, cruelty, or isolation, but by trust, respect, and the quiet promise of companionship. Together, they had begun to rewrite the story of her life, proving that courage, support, and integrity could overcome even the harshest judgment. The widow's life had changed in ways she had never imagined. After months of tension, quiet support, and small victories, she now faced each day with a confidence that had long been absent from her life. The rancher's presence had become a steady anchor, a symbol of trust and care she could rely on without fear bringing. He did not impose himself on her, nor did he take away her independence. Instead, he offered strength when she needed it most, and allowed her to grow at her own pace. Their partnership, built on shared hardships and quiet understanding, began to flourish. Each morning, they worked together on the ranch, tending to livestock, repairing fences, and preparing the land for the coming season. The widow, once fearful and withdrawn, now moved with purpose and calm determination. She discovered that her hands, strong from years of work, could accomplish even more when paired with someone who respected her skills and ideas. The rancher admired her in ways he had not expected, but the way she approached each challenge with dignity and thoughtfulness. He noticed the small gestures, how she paused to notice the sunrise, how she cared for the animals, how she spoke to the workers with respect, even if they were younger or less experienced. She had endured years of cruelty, yet she never allowed it to harden her completely. Instead, she remained kind, thoughtful, and capable. The town, which had once been so hostile, began to notice the change as well. The widow's growing confidence and the rancher's calm authority created a visible shift. Some of the townspeople who had previously whispered cruelly and spread rumors began to approach her with cautious respect. They saw that she was no longer alone, that she had support, and that she carried herself with strength that could not easily be shaken. It was not immediate, nor was it complete. Some people still whispered behind her back, but the weight of their cruelty had diminished. The widow no longer feared public spaces, and the rancher's presence ensured that those who might have tried to intimidate her were aware that she had protection and allies. Gradually, she began to participate in town life more openly, visiting the market and speaking with neighbors, all the while carrying herself with a quiet pride. The rancher and the widow began to develop routines that brought a sense of normalcy and comfort. They shared meals on the porch of the ranch, watching the cattle graze and the sun set over the plains. They talked about simple things, the changing seasons, the health of the animals, and the work that lay ahead. Breath. Slowly, the conversations deepened. They shared memories of the past, dreams for the future, and thoughts they had never spoken aloud to anyone else. The widow found herself laughing more often, a sound that had been rare in her life since her husband's passing. She discovered that joy could coexist with sorrow, that strength did not mean shutting out happiness, and that companionship could be a source of healing rather than dependency. The rancher, too, found unexpected comfort and joy. He realized that helping her was no longer just about protecting someone vulnerable. It had become about building a life together, one grounded in mutual respect, shared effort, and genuine care.
One spring morning, they decided to plant a small orchard near the ranch.
Together, they tilled the soil, dug holes for saplings, and carefully placed each tree into the earth. The widow's hands were covered in dirt, but she smiled as she worked.
"I never thought I would have a garden this large," she said softly. "It feels like hope." The rancher smiled back.
"It is hope," he replied. "A place where life can grow and where we can watch it flourish together." The orchard became a symbol of their new life, patience. Each tree represented resilience, patience, and the possibility of growth after hardship. As they tended to it together, the widow felt a sense of peace she had not known for years. She realized that life was not just about surviving cruelty or enduring hardship. It was about creating something lasting, beautiful, and filled with promise. Their relationship deepened naturally, built on shared trust and understanding. They did not rush, nor did they force feelings that had not yet fully formed. Instead, love grew quietly, like the orchard saplings taking root in the fertile soil. The widow learned to rely on another person without losing her independence, and the rancher learned to offer care and protection without diminishing her strength. It was a balance neither had experienced before, and it brought a sense of fulfillment to both their lives. The town slowly adapted as well. Neighbors who had once been cold or judgmental began to show small gestures of acceptance. But some helped with farm work, others brought greetings when they passed the ranch. The widow, once isolated, now found herself part of a small but growing circle of community support. It was not perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but the balance had shifted. Where once there had been fear and cruelty, there was now cautious respect, curiosity, and even admiration. One afternoon, the rancher and the widow decided to host a small gathering at the ranch. They invited neighbors and townspeople who had been supportive, along with a few who had been skeptical but willing to see change. It was a simple affair. A shared meal, music from a local fiddle, and quiet conversation under the open sky. The widow, standing beside the rancher, felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She realized that acceptance could come, not through force, but through courage, integrity, and the willingness to face fear with dignity.
The rancher noticed her expression and smiled.
"You've come a long way," he said gently. And I am proud of you. The widow looked down, a faint blush on her cheeks.
I couldn't have done it alone, she admitted. You showed me it was possible to trust again. He took her hand, not as a gesture of ownership, but as a symbol of partnership.
We are stronger together, he said. And there is still so much more we can build. The seasons continued to change, and life on the ranch grew richer. They faced challenges, of course, the weather, the hard work, and occasional reminders of the town's lingering skepticism. But they faced them together. Each challenge strengthened their bond, teaching them patience, resilience, and the value of mutual support. The widow discovered skills she had never imagined she could master, managing livestock, repairing fences, and tending crops on a larger scale. Each success was shared, celebrated quietly, with smiles and simple words of encouragement. The rancher also grew in ways he had not anticipated. He learned the quiet art of patience, the value of listening, and the power of empathy. He realized that wealth and power alone could not protect someone. It was care, understanding, and respect that truly made a difference. In the widow, he had found not just someone to protect, but a partner who could teach him the meaning of courage and perseverance in a world that was often harsh and unfair.
Over time, even the skeptics in the town began to accept them.
People who had once whispered insults now nodded in acknowledgement. They saw the widow's strength, the rancher's integrity, and the partnership that had formed between them.
Their bond was no longer a source of scandal or gossip. It had become a quiet example of what respect, trust, and courage could achieve. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, the widow and the rancher walked hand in hand through the orchard they had planted together. The trees were beginning to grow strong and healthy, their leaves fluttering gently in the evening breeze.
The widow looked at the young trees, and then at the rancher.
This feels like a new beginning, she said softly. He nodded, squeezing her hand gently.
It is a new beginning, he agreed. A life built on trust, courage, and hope. In that moment, they both understood the depth of what they had accomplished. The widow had faced years of fear, cruelty, and loneliness, yet she had emerged stronger and wiser. The rancher had found purpose not just in wealth or influence, but in making a meaningful difference in someone's life.
Together they had created a life filled with dignity, care, and the quiet joy of shared effort.
Their love, still growing and deepening, was not a sudden passion, but a steady flame.
It was a love that had been forged through adversity, strengthened by trust, and nurtured by mutual respect. It was a love that would endure because it was based on understanding, equality, and the recognition of each other's value. As the stars appeared in the night sky, they sat together on the porch, watching the vast plains stretch out before them. The town, once hostile and cruel, had softened, and the widow had reclaimed her life in ways she had never imagined. The rancher's steady presence, combined with her courage and resilience, had turned fear into hope, isolation into companionship, and judgment into acceptance. The story of the widow and the rancher became known quietly in the town, not as a tale of scandal or gossip, but as a story of courage, resilience, and the power of quiet kindness. Their lives, intertwined through trust and shared experience, had transformed not only their own futures but also the way others saw strength, dignity, and partnership. And so, life continued on the ranch. The widow worked the land she loved, cared for her animals, and tended to the orchard that symbolized growth and renewal. The rancher stood beside her, offering support, sharing work, and providing companionship that was steady, respectful, and genuine. Together, they faced the future with hope, courage, and the knowledge that even after suffering and cruelty, a life of trust, dignity, and love was possible. The widow had found safety. The rancher had found purpose, and together they had built a life that was richer, fuller, and brighter than either could have imagined alone. The plain stretched out before them, endless and open, much like the life they now shared, a life reclaimed from hardship, defined by resilience, and filled with the quiet joy of a love that had been patiently, faithfully nurtured.